Alright, welcome boys and girls, Eugene Hughes Motorized. This is part 8 where we're going to service the front wheel. Basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how you're going to take a look at the front bearings on your front wheel. We're going to pack them with grease, inspect them, make sure your bearings are set correctly. Then we're going to true the front wheel, make sure the wheel doesn't have a bunch of wobble in it. And hey, we want some additional stopping power. While we're looking at this end of the horse, let's go ahead and add at least a caliper brake on this bike here. So come on, let's see what we got. All right, so let's take a look at the front axle and what we need to do to service it. So here's a bare naked axle ripped out of the hub for the whole world to see. All right, so now you can see the axle nut. We're going to take the axle nut off, and we've got the locking nut, which is tight against the cone nut. Now this is the cone nut, and the cone nut, it is snug against your bearings, ideally. And what we want to do is we're going to loosen the locking nut from the cone nut, back the locking nut off about 1 inch, and then we're going to unscrew the cone nut about 3/4 of an inch, 1 inch, whatever, just where we can get some grease right in there in this area here. Now this is the area where the bearings ride up on the cone nut. So I'll show you how to do it. It's a little tricky sometimes because they get those locking nuts so incredibly tight against the cone nut, it's difficult at times to break them loose. Now, because for me, we're playing with bearing grease. Glove up if you got them. Okay, so these guys here, I think they have contests at the factory and see just how freaking tight they can get these locking nuts against the cone nut on the axle. So you got your shaft, you got a locking nut, and then basically you have another nut behind it, and that's cone shaped, and that presses inside against the bearings here. So I'll show you what we got here. Now, your standard, what you need to do is you want to break this nut here loose from your cone nut. You've got a couple of options here. I think the best way to do it is to use a cone wrench here. It's made specifically where it's very thin. Problem is, as tight as they get these things here, there's just, these here are too flimsy. They wind up twisting the jaws and getting the thing off. Now we want to be careful when we take this off and unscrew this here because the bearings that are in here are loose. They're not caged. So, and oftentimes with bearings like this in the factory, they act as if there's a grease shortage and they don't put enough grease in there. That's why we're doing it here. Figure if you tear into it, it's got more grease than you'd ever want, but if you don't, it's dry. So let's go ahead and just see what we got here. I'm using a 13 millimeter. Now, I had to break it loose earlier using the impact wrench because it was that tight here. So what I did is I used the cone nut wrench here behind it. And my 17 millimeter socket and broke it loose. If you don't have an impact here, what you can do is use the 17 millimeter wrench on the nut on one side and then back it up on the other side with a 17 millimeter wrench, and still sometimes it's tight. You still could wind up stripping the threads here because really it's so tight between the locking nut and the cone nut. So I've got this loose. So let's zoom in. And I'm just unscrewing. Let's see, I'll do it with the tool so you can see here. And as I'm unscrewing, let's get this nut off. And let's get it back. I'm unscrewing just the cone. Like I said, be careful because there's bearings behind it and you don't want to lose the bearings. So now that I've got this loose, the axle and the cone nut both will fall. If I push on this here, whatever gap you see here will occur on the other side if I push it all the way in. you can see the bearings in there. So all we really want to do is get some good grease, some lithium grease, axle grease, and I'm putting more than what I need back there. And if you got bearings on both sides, that's why we're greasing the side here too. Okay, now I know I've got plenty of grease in there. Clean off your excess. Now what I want to do is I want to tighten this up the correct tension. You don't want to get it so tight that it puts the bearing in a bind. And I'm just backing up the nut here on the other side. And I'm going to tighten it up to where it feels tight. And then turn the axle. And make sure that there's no play, that you can't feel the axle move back and forth, up and down. You can't jiggle it any at all. But make sure it can spin freely. Alright, and then we're going to give it, just get it nice and snug here. And then once you tighten it up, check it again. Because you never know. Once you tighten all this back up, once you tighten the lock nut up, you may have gotten it too tight to where the bearings will be in a bind. But we're not. We're good to go. There's no slop. So now let's go ahead and check the wheel and see how true it is. And we're ready to go. Basically what you want to do is find the area, what we call the high side here, that you'll put a something against the wheel. Now they sell expensive truing stands. You don't need a truing stand. If you got a bike, use your forks. Use the ass end of the bike. Put it on here. Now I removed the tire. That way we can see a little bit closer here. As well, if you can, you're better off to go ahead and remove the tire. Remove the, that way you don't have the pressure of your inner tube against the rim strip while you're turning the spoke nipples. And that way it's not going to take a chunk out of the rim strip, which could lead to a flat later on, okay? So, like I said, you don't need an expensive truing stand and an indicator. I'm using a carpenter's pencil. I've used a screwdriver, the handle of a screwdriver, and held it against the front forks, or I've held it against the chainstay here along the frame, the lower part of the frame, and just put it against the rim and spin it. So basically all we're going to do is we're going to put this tool against the side of the rim. We're going to spin it, and then where it pushes out on that one side, that's where you need to make the adjustment. So if it's pushing out here on this side here where I've got the pencil, we need to come over on the spokes here on the opposite side and tighten them up. Typically I've found that all I need to do is tighten up 3 spokes. That's what's typically going to go ahead and rectify the situation here. You've got one, let's say that if between 1, 2, the 3 spokes on this side here, well, the center spoke on that side, that's the one you need to tighten up a little bit more, and then just tighten just a little bit here on the first one and then the one following it, and that'll pull it in line. So one little trick you can do as well that help, you want to make sure that your spokes are set in, particularly with a newer bike. If you're taking the time to go ahead and remove the tire, take the tube off, let's see to it that the spokes are set in. And that's pretty simple. I'm going to do it on this stump here. All I'm doing is just pushing down on the rim, not super hard. Turn it just a little bit. Do it there, turn it, push it down again, push it down again. What that does, that makes sure that the spokes are pretty well set into the rim and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and put this on the bike. Then we're going to use our high dollar indicator. Okay, so what you do is you take your straight edge, you take your tool, your pointer, your indicator, as we're going to call it here. In this case, it's the carpenter's pencil. And I push it against the rim and I slowly rotate it. And where it's pushed out, okay, if it's, let's say it's bowed out right here, it's going to push the tool out a little bit here. So we push it, it'll push the tool here and you're just going to hold it. And then where it's no longer bowed out, you'll get a gap. So I'm exaggerating. So here we got a gap. And then as you turn it where it needs adjusting, it'll close the gap and it might even rub. And then as you go a little bit further, the gap will increase. So at the area where it's rubbing, that's where you need to make your adjustment. Now you want to make the adjustment on the correct side, and typically it's where you see the least amount of distortion on the side. So if the majority of one side seems like it's pulled over, well, look on the other side and you may see that just in one small area where it's going to push against your tool, and then the rest of the area you'll have the gap. Okay, so we've got the wheel on. We're going to give it a spin, right? So all you really got to do is you got to take your tool, quote unquote. I'm using the carpenter's pencil here. And we're going to put it against the wheel. Okay, against the edge of the rim here. And let's spin it around. And I can feel it pushing the pencil away. Okay, now I've got a gap. It's not rubbing against it. Got a gap all the way around, and it starts to rub again here. Now, right here is the valve stem, the opening for the valve stem. So, right about there, to maybe just a little bit after the valve stem, is where we need to tighten up. So what we're going to do here is, in this one spot, the wheel is pushed this way here. So what we need to do, we need to come over here and tighten it up, and that's going to draw the wheel that way. Now you can buy a nice handy dandy little adjuster that fits the spokes, or if you got you a multitasker here, this works fine. You just got to get it snug against the nipple. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're going to work in threes here. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, and 3. And so what we're going to do, we're going to tighten it up. And the spoke that's in the middle is the one that I'm going to be tightening up the most. So what you got to remember is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So we're tightening up the nipple, so the nipple is screwed in from inside the rim. So imagine you're turning it clockwise when you're looking at it from the top going through the rim. So let's see what we got here. Well, I'm just going to push it against the wheel. And I've still got just a little bit of rub. I've got most of it out. Let's go ahead and tighten it up just a little bit more. And I just wiggle the wrench back and forth and tighten it up till I get it good and snug. And then we got it. And I bet we got this bad boy. I've got it pressed against the rim. It's rubbing. And that is a true rim. Okay, so now you're good to go here. You're not going to have that wobble. Hey, for a pedal bike, you get a little wobble. That's not a problem so much. But you're wanting to go 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, whatever. You get a bit of wobble in it. Hey, it's not fun. All right, so now that we have the front wheel trued, let's get it on the forks of the bike. I want you to consider adding at least a caliper brake. That's what we're doing on this. This is a budget build. If you can get your hands on a front wheel with a disc brake, great, or even better, in my opinion, a front wheel with a hub, a drum brake, like a moped style. That's the best in my opinion. They're hard to get nowadays for whatever reason. But look, let's go with this budget caliper brake. It mounts where the same bolt that holds on your front fender goes through. I'm showing you this without the front fender. It just goes through the same mount. Now you've got two spacers on it, the thicker. They look like a washer, they're a little bit thicker. You know it when you see it. It's got a little curved in area. That mates against the round part here where the mounting bolt goes through. You just push the stud through, put one of the spacer that's dished on the front, one on the back, put some additional washers on it that come with the kit. You then have a nylock nut, clench it tight. Make sure you've got the brake where it kind of floats in the middle. You're going to pull in on the two pads there and pull the pads against the wheel. Make sure that they will evenly make contact with your rim. Then what we need to do is we need to adjust the pads that are on the caliper to make sure that the pads hit the side of the rim at the correct angle. So you can adjust the pad up and down, and you can adjust the angle of the dangle, as it were. Let's go ahead and thread the cable through the cable holder, and then here you've got the little clamp that holds onto the cable. It just has a hole drilled in it. You push the cable through that, and you tighten this up here. We're going to leave the cable as it sits now, and we'll finish it up when I install the levers and all the controls on the handlebars. That's it for this part here. Stay tuned for part 9 where we install the drive sprocket on the bike. Hey, if you think this video is helpful, come on, give me a thumbs up. Click that subscribe button. Click for notifications. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. There's more to come. Thank you.